Hey folks, what's up? I got a hell of a show for you. Hell of a moment of clarity for you today. Sorry, still setting some things up. Thanks for joining me. Please take a second to share this, let people know. As you probably recall, I am in many ways the most censored comedian in America right now. TV show canceled, 8 years of episodes banned on YouTube globally. Podcast Moment of Clarity deleted from Spotify, but I'm going to keep fighting, if you will. So join me on patreon.com/Lee Camp. And let's see, we're going live on Rockfin as well. Please click subscribe on YouTube and all that shit. Click the bell when you hit subscribe. And here's the thing. I know, yes, YouTube could delete me tomorrow. They very well might. This is my other channel. The Redacted Tonight channel is already banned globally, but this one continues on. Or you might be watching me on Rockfin, where hopefully I don't see them banning me anytime soon. But I've got a hell of a show for you. However, and let me just, this is what I'll lead with. This is how we know that my stuff and a lot of the great content that you've been probably learning from, gaining from on Ukraine and what's going on in Ukraine, it could be banned from YouTube very soon. Google just wrote this, and I'm sorry I can't put it up on the screen. I don't have it there at the moment, but they sent out an email saying, "Dear publisher," this is from so Google owns YouTube, most of you know. They said, "Dear publisher, due to the war in Ukraine, we will pause monetization of content that exploits, dismisses, or condones the war." Now, that may sound kind of positive. Oh, great. They're going to, all right, yeah, don't condone war. Cool. But what do they call condoning the war, right? Basically, if you don't give exactly the U.S. Western propaganda outlook of what's going on in Ukraine, then you are, quote unquote, condoning the war. Even though I've said a million times, I am anti-war. I'm anti the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm anti the expansion of NATO. I'm anti-Nazi. I'm anti all those things. Oh my goodness, you can be all those things at once. What? Who would have said that? Thank you, Bella, for the donation. Very kind of you. So to continue, they say, "Please note, we have already been enforcing on claims related to the war in Ukraine when they violated existing policies." Keep in mind, this is Google AdSense, which owns YouTube. They haven't banned anything that Fox News has ever done. Fox News has never put up a video. And I'm just throwing Fox News out there, obviously, also CNN, MSNBC, any of them. Never once has YouTube been like, yeah, Fox News, you put up racist content. We're going to demonetize it. No. Fox News is legit and excellent, according to YouTube. So is CNN. So is MSNBC. They say this pause includes, but is not limited to, claims that imply victims are responsible for their own tragedy or similar instances of victim blaming, such as claims that Ukraine is committing genocide or deliberately attacking its own citizens. I mean, it's hilarious. This is kind of like a couple of years ago, the CEO of YouTube said they had decreased viewing of, what do they call it? Extremist content, I believe, by 70%, which sounds great. Oh, great. They're not showing people Nazi videos anymore. Guess what? Extremist content, they consider this extremist content. They consider what you and I are doing right now extremist content. Basically, if you are questioning the bullshit coming out of our bullshit media machine, then you are somehow, condoning the war, which is hilarious because, on so many levels. But what do you think the U.S. government is doing right now? They're condoning the war because the U.S. government is sending weapons to create war, to continue the war. They are telling Zelensky not to go into the peace process and not to actually end the war. So they're condoning the war, right? That's actually condoning the war. That's actually sending weapons to continue war. So infuriating. But anyway, that was a side note that, and here's the thing, when they say demonetize, it's not just demonetize. It's also not show the videos to anybody. So yes, it sounds nice to say demonetize, but that's not what they it's far beyond demonetizing. Anyway, so that's why I'm, increasing my focus on patreon.com/LeeCamp. That way, if you're there, if you follow me there, hopefully they won't delete me, although I'll have more updates on that coming in the coming weeks. Anyway, what I really want to get to is I read, this is one of the best analysis I've seen of the deeper issues that are going on with the war in Ukraine, with the war between U.S. and Russia. Ukraine is a proxy war, as most of you watching this already know. In fact, the Wall Street Journal just today came out with an article where the headline was, "Why is Ukraine's military doing so well? NATO training." Well, okay. If the U.S. essentially runs NATO, which we know it does, and NATO trained the Ukrainian military, then doesn't that give credence to the fact that this is a proxy war between U.S. and Russia and that NATO was in Ukraine? I mean, Wall Street Journal's just yelling it. Front page, hey, Ukrainian military is NATO, is trained by NATO, U.S. armaments and weapons sent to them. But actually, before I get to, I just told you I'm going to get to the deeper understanding of what is going on here globally with the war in Ukraine is just a tiny piece of a much larger puzzle, which I'm going to get to. It has some reference to what videos I've already done on the central banking system, the petrodollar, but it kind of reveals the whole chessboard in maybe a larger way than even just talking about the central banking. But before we even get to that, speaking of NATO and the U.S. training and running this war in Ukraine as a proxy war against Russia, this video, this is pretty mind-blowing. This is a French journalist, and it's in French with subtitles. But I have sent it to I sent it to a friend of mine who speaks French, and she verified that it is a correct translation. Because I always worry that when you see a video where you see subtitles and it's like, you know, let's say a Ukrainian soldier saying something, and underneath it says, "We're crazy and we like to eat babies," or a Russian soldier, and the subtitles say like, "Oh my goodness, I love shooting kittens," or whatever. I always wonder, like, how do we know the subtitles are accurate? Like, it's one thing if you see a video where you see the person saying the words, but who subtitled this? So I did send this to someone who actually speaks the French and verified that these subtitles are correct. So let's watch this video of a French journalist speaking about the war in Ukraine.
Et j'ai accompagné des volontaires français. Vous savez, il y a un certain nombre. Il y a eu un appel au début du président Zelensky qui a demandé à des volontaires internationaux qui souhaitaient, qui avaient des expériences de combat. Et donc j'ai accompagné 3 Français, dont un qui a déjà été militaire avant, et 2 qui avaient combattu ensemble au Rojava avec les Kurdes contre Daesh. Donc des gens qui avaient des expériences militaires. J'ai passé plusieurs jours avec eux et j'ai eu la surprise, et eux aussi, de découvrir in fine que pour pouvoir aller dans l'armée ukrainienne, eh bien, c'est les Américains qui sont à la manœuvre. C'est-à-dire que nous, on a failli se faire arrêter. On a été confronté à un Américain qui est venu nous dire « Ici, c'est moi qui commande ». C'est pas les Ukrainiens qui commandent, c'est moi qui commande. Je parle de la formation et de l'enrôlement dans l'armée ukrainienne de volontaires internationaux. Voilà. Le type m'a même donné son nom. C'est un ancien de la guerre d'Irak. J'ai fait mes vérifications. C'est un reportage qu'on peut retrouver dans le Figaro Magazine de cette semaine. J'ai été extrêmement surpris de la violence des propos de cet Américain, du fait qu'il nous a pris pour des volontaires au début. Quand il a vu qu'on était des journalistes, il nous a dit de dégager. Après, il était un peu plus... mais en l'occurrence, c'est moi qui commande. Vous enlevez les puces de vos portables, surtout les puces internationaux. On vous donnera d'autres puces, etc. Et ensuite, on signe un contrat jusqu'à la fin de la guerre. Et qui est à la manœuvre? Eh ben, ce sont les Américains. Je l'ai vu de mes yeux vus. C'est pas, alors, ce n'est pas l'armée américaine officiellement. J'ai compris. Évidemment, vous comprenez. on va pas le dire. Mais en l'occurrence, c'est quand même quelque chose
d'assez américains.
Ouais. C'est quand même assez significatif. On sait que là, hier, ils ont envoyé une centaine de nouvelles armes qui s'appellent des switchblades, qui sont des sortes de drones qu'on envoie par mortier et ensuite qu'on peut téléguider, donc des nouvelles armes. Officiellement, ils l'ont fait et ils vont le faire. Donc, ils ont quand même opéré par rapport à ce que dit Karim, c'est quand même la vérité. Moi, j'ai eu l'impression un petit peu, quelque part, que cette guerre, au-delà de l'aspect romantique, moi j'ai l'impression d'être avec les brigades internationales et in fine, je me retrouve avec le Pentagone, quoi, en face.
So that is pretty incredible. This is a French journalist going to Ukraine as a journalist and finding that Americans are in charge of accepting people into the country, accepting and controlling journalists. And he said it was not officially American military, but that the person claiming to be in charge was clearly former American military because he was a veteran of Iraq. And, you know, this is not like the French, right? French media is not told to give that standpoint, right? That's the turd in the punch bowl because the French are aligning with the U.S. in this whole thing. Now they've clearly been forced into that. The French and the Germans wanted to try and keep some sort of cooperation with Russia, but have not been allowed to thanks to U.S. pressure. We're going to get more into that in a second. But that video is pretty amazing because he says quite clearly, you know, I was kind of shocked to see that it is the Americans in charge of it. And then he talks about how the U.S. had just sent Switchblade drones to Ukraine, but that is a tiny amount of what the U.S. is sending to Ukraine. Hundreds of millions of dollars Biden and Congress have allotted to sending weaponry and other kinds of aid to Ukraine to keep this war going and make sure it keeps going, because the U.S. does not want this to end. They do not want any sort of peace agreement. They want to, what's the expression people have been passing around? They want to fight Russia to the last Ukrainian. And that's what this is. It is, let's fight Russia endlessly until we've killed every Ukrainian. I mean, it truly is repulsive. I mean, honestly, it's tough to even sum up the horror of what's going on over there. And as I've said, you don't have to believe the reports, many of which are later debunked, or maybe all of which are later debunked, that Russia is aiming at civilians, to know that war kills a lot of innocent civilians. And people don't just die from the bombs. Innocent civilians don't just die from bombs. They die from not being able to get medical care, from not being able to get food or clean water. They die for a lot of reasons. War destroys societies and destroys lives. And the U.S. wants to keep this one going as long as possible. And they want people waving a big Ukrainian flag to keep this war going and make sure there is no process. It truly is mind-blowing. So on that front, with that understanding, let's get to, this is a damn good analysis written by Michael Hudson and reprinted at Popular Resistance. 1 second here. Oh, by the way, if you want to see more videos like this, please become a member at patreon.com/Lee Camp. The lowest tier is $1.25 a week, and you get all the exclusive content. If you sign up at $10 a month, you get a free PDF of my book, Bullet Points and Punchlines. So I hope you'll do that. Become a member at patreon.com/Lee Camp. All right, so here is the Popular Resistance reposted article. He titled it "The Dollar Devours the Euro," but it's really much deeper than that. So I want to dig into some of this because I think it is really an impressive analysis. So he says, it's now clear that today's escalation of the new Cold War was planned over a year ago with serious strategy associated with America's plan to block Nord Stream 2 as part of the aim of blocking Western Europe or NATO from seeking prosperity by mutual trade and investment with China and Russia. So Nord Stream 2, many of you may already know, giant pipeline, massive pipeline that had already been constructed between Russia and Germany. And Europe gets 40% of their oil, their gas from Russia. Now they're trying urgently to undo that, thanks to what's going on right now. But it doesn't, it's not changing tomorrow. And Russia has just demanded that they pay in rubles, which has helped the price of the ruble. And Russia did that in response to all the sanctions against them. But the U.S., it was very evident, to those of us paying attention, that the U.S. was going to find some sort of way to stop not just that pipeline, but the Belt and Road Initiative coming from China to up to the EU, other economic arrangements that in cooperation that was happening increasingly between Russia, China, and the EU. And so here we have it. Now, you may say, well, Putin's the one who invaded. It's true, but the U.S. knew what they were doing by encircling and filling Ukraine with NATO weaponry and et cetera. Anyway, we'll get more into that. Getting ahead of myself. As President Biden and U.S. national security reports announced, China was seen as the major enemy. China's growth was recognized as posing the ultimate terror, prosperity through socialism. Now, most of you know, China's not fully socialist. There is a lot of capitalism and capitalist money in China. There are people getting very rich in China, but it has a socialist industrial base in many ways. So I think it's easy to hear, fighting China and fighting socialism and go, well, China's not socialist. They have capitalist, a lot of capitalism there too. So yes, that's true. However, it is socialist industrialization in most ways. So to continue on, he says, socialist industrialization always has been perceived to be the great enemy of the rentier economy. And I like that term, the rentier economy. You basically spend most of your life trying to rent your life back from corporations, from corporate America, especially for those of you, and it's many of us. I'm lucky that I get to pursue my passion for the most part, but most people don't. Most people, their passion is a side hustle. Most people have to take jobs, and many people convince themselves they enjoy their jobs, but most people have to take jobs they hate, or jobs they dislike, or jobs they mildly dislike, or jobs that they don't necessarily dislike, but it's not their passion in life. We'll just leave it at that. And so you work those jobs to basically rent a life. Why should you have to rent a life? Why should your life be something you have to rent back? Shouldn't you just have a life? We're free for like a minute, and then we're put into wage slavery most of our lives. And many people die due to that wage slavery, right? You talk about like coal miners dying at 45 from black lung, or soldiers dying at young ages because they signed up to pay for college, or plenty of people that die for you could go as small as someone who hated being a waitress back in the days when everybody could smoke inside. Hated being a waitress, but they worked in a really smoky club and got, emphysema because they were fucking surrounded in cigar smoke all day long, or whatever the fuck. Like, people take jobs that harm their health in plenty of ways, even if we don't get into what they say, sitting is the new smoking. If you're seated all day, then you're also not going to live that long, I guess. But anyway, that may be getting too deep into the weeds there. But so to continue, he says, socialist industrialization always has been perceived to be the great enemy of the rentier economy that has taken over most nations in the century since World War I ended, and especially since the 1980s. The result today is a clash of economic systems: socialist industrialization versus neoliberal finance capitalism. That makes the new Cold War against China an implicit opening act of what threatens to be a long, drawn-out World War III. The U.S. strategy is to pry away China's most likely economic allies, especially Russia, Central Asia, South Asia, and East Asia. The question was where to start the carve-up and isolation. So, you don't have to be a real close observer to notice that the U.S. does this with countries that we can't just full on attack economically or straight up with bombs and missiles. We try and carve off pieces to slowly harm them. And that's one of the reasons for this made up Uyghur genocide, which I've done coverage on Redacted tonight. If you want to see the full breakdown of how hilarious the whole Uyghur genocide in China is. And by the way, they don't, if you get them to really talk about it, they don't even call it a genocide. They call it a cultural genocide because they know, and everyone knows, that China is not killing Uyghurs. But these reports are hilariously false. And you can go to China, you go tour China and see Uyghurs walking around everywhere and see mosques and things and go, oh, that's funny. I thought they were all murdered. But no, turns out not. But anyway, part of the reasoning behind that is the U.S. wants to carve off that region of China and make it a Uyghur independent region. So the U.S. is doing it with that area, or trying to do it. They're trying to do it with Hong Kong. They're trying to carve off pieces and interrupt economic cooperation between countries, such as between Russia and China. So let's keep going here. Russia was seen as presenting the greatest opportunity to begin isolating both from China and from the NATO Eurozone. A sequence of increasingly severe and hopefully fatal sanctions against Russia, they mean hopefully for the U.S., hopefully fatal sanctions against Russia was drawn up. And by the way, Biden just admitted this, right? That he wants this to be fatal for the current ruling class of Russia, because Biden admitted, remember he did that ad lib in that speech where he said, Putin cannot, for God's sake, this man can't remain in power. Well, it's fine for you or me to think, yeah, Putin shouldn't be in power. But to have that be a U.S. policy means that the U.S. policy is regime change in Russia. And if that's the truth, if the U.S. policy right now is regime change in Russia, then they've admitted this is a proxy war. They've admitted they're fighting in Ukraine to try and create regime change in Russia. But they don't want to admit that. So Biden, with his little ad lib, accidentally revealed this is a proxy war to try and create regime change in Russia. Russia was seen as presenting the greatest opportunity to begin isolation. A sequence of increasing severe and hopefully fatal sanctions against Russia was drawn up to block NATO from trading with it. All that was needed to ignite the geopolitical earthquake was a casus belli, a cause for war, right? And in terms of NATO trading with it, we saw at the beginning of this invasion of Ukraine that initially France and Germany tried very hard to keep cooperation with Russia. And in fact, France, I think, was one of the main voices and proponents for Ukraine to actually implement the Minsk agreements that Russia said would stop this, would stop invasion, would stop a war, because they came to this agreement, but then Ukraine didn't do it. So France was trying to have them hold to that agreement, and they didn't. The pressures on Zelensky were probably the U.S. and the billionaire that funded Zelensky, as well as the Nazis that are within Ukrainian government. They're not a high percentage. The Nazi candidate ran for office in Ukraine and lost pretty badly, but they are the most violent, and so their threats hold a lot of power. If they say, Zelensky needs to do this or we're going to kill him, a lot of the politicians believe that type of thing. So it's understandable that would amount to pretty immense pressure. Let's see. Ukraine has been subjected to a U.S.-backed civil war for 8 years. Most of you recall the 2014 Maidan coup. And the civil war offered the chance for the greatest first victory in this confrontation against China, Russia, and their allies. So the 2014 Maidan coup, U.S.-backed, also Nazi-backed, but the U.S. was funding and arming these Nazis to create a coup. I mean, Ukraine is heavily corrupt, But the corrupt leader they had before 2014 was leaning towards Russian allegiance as opposed to Western and US allegiance. And so we helped create a coup there. Russia's preemptive defense of the 2 eastern Ukrainian provinces and its subsequent military destruction of the Ukrainian army, navy, and air force over the past 2 months has been used as the excuse to start imposing the US-designed sanctions program that we are seeing unfold today. Western Europe has dutifully gone along whole hog, instead of which I don't think I even knew was an expression. Instead of buying Russian gas, oil, and food grains, it will buy these from the U.S., along with sharply increased arms imports. So Western Europe has been forced to suddenly upend their economies, try and get fuel and oil from the U.S. and other places. But of course, importing it from the U.S. is far more expensive than a pipeline from Russia. And so they've kind of been forced into this, because this is a U.S. proxy war that they weren't really ready for. They weren't signing off on, but the U.S. is kind of turning them into feudal states again. Or maybe not again for some of them, but turning them into feudal states. Let's see. European trade and investment prior to the war to impose sanctions had promised a rising mutual prosperity between Germany, France, and other NATO countries vis-a-vis Russia and China. Russia was providing abundant energy at a competitive price. And by the way, I don't like calling it energy because fossil fuels are killing the planet. So we should call all energy planetary death fluid. Not all energy. We should call oil planetary death fluid. So they were getting cheaper planetary death fluid from Russia and China. This planetary death fluid was to make a quantum leap with Nord Stream 2, with the pipeline. This bilateral trade and investment is now stopped. It's all ceased, which is what the U.S. wanted, and will remain stopped for many, many years, given NATO's confiscation of Russian foreign reserves. NATO basically confiscated Russian gold reserves, which I think it was half of them, kept in euros and British pound, British sterling, and their gold. Half of it was kept outside of Russia in these places where it could be confiscated. So they have confiscated Russia's reserves. And European Russophobia is being fanned by U.S. propaganda media. So great, as you all know, great hatred of Russia right now. And you can be against the Russian invasion, but still view hating all Russian people, hating everything that has the word Russian in it, fucking screaming at your Russian salad dressing. That's all fucking insane, and you're an idiot. So, yeah, just know that when you're getting ready to throw a brick through a Russian restaurant here in the U.S., just know you're a fucking idiot. In its place, NATO countries will purchase U.S. LNG, which stands for liquid natural gas, which is a euphemism for planetary death fluid. But they will need to spend billions of dollars building sufficient port capacity, which may take until perhaps 2024. Michael Hudson then says, good luck until then. Good luck until 2024 when you actually have the capacity to bring in the U.S. fuel, which, by the way, is from fracking, which is making all of our water undrinkable, destroying communities, causing earthquakes around the United States in places that never had earthquakes before. But that's okay. That's fine, right? Yeah, why wouldn't we do that? Just to support a U.S. proxy war and U.S. hegemony. The energy shortage will sharply raise the world price of gas and oil. NATO countries also will step up their purchases of arms from the U.S. military-industrial complex. The near-panic buying will also raise the price for arms. And food prices also will rise as a result of the desperate grain shortfalls resulting from a cessation of imports from Russia and Ukraine. Ukraine was known as like the main grain, the main country that grew and produced grain in all of like Europe and Russia. So they were getting a lot of their grain from Ukraine. And I think mainly they did that because it rhymes. So cessation of imports from Russia and Ukraine on the one hand, and the shortage of ammonia fertilizer made from gas. All three of these trade dynamics will strengthen the dollar via the euro. The question is, how will Europe balance its international payments with the United States? So all of this fucks Europe royally. And yet the U.S. is having their way, is getting their way. That Europe is signing on to be fucked. The EU is signing up to have their economies just harmed greatly, maybe not collapsed, but harmed greatly, have people struggle, have gas prices go through the roof, have grain and food prices go through the roof. Let's do it. Sounds good. The Eurozone has been created with monetary handcuffs, limiting its ability to create money to spend into the economy beyond the limit of 3% of GDP. So I've done videos, it's been a while, but I've done videos on this as well about how the euro as a financial instrument was actually designed to handcuff countries, to make it difficult for those countries like Greece or Italy, all these countries to actually deal with their own financial issues. They had to take out massive loans from, the IMF or the World Bank. So the euro, by definition, was meant to make it difficult for these countries to actually have independence. And that's exactly what this is saying as well. They don't have, and furthermore, because they can't just print money like we can with our dollar, they can't just print money to solve their problems. They don't have the modern monetary situation where they can just go, oh yeah, we just found $1 trillion. Yeah, it's under the couch. I don't know. Crazy, right? There you go. Give it to Wall Street. It'll get pumped back into the society. Maybe it'll trickle down onto our face a little bit. For Europe, the dollar cost of its foreign debt taken on to finance its widening trade deficit with the United States for oil, arms, and food will explode. For the U.S., this is dollar hegemony on steroids, at least via Europe. Michael Hudson clearly likes the term via. Anytime you can use a French term in there, you just totally should. Escargot. Exactly. I'm gonna use escargot in casual conversation to mean like my cargoes, like let's go, like escargot out of here. Like I don't think that's what escargot means at all, man. No, can we get moving, escargot? Come on. I think anytime you get a chance to use a foreign phrase in an incorrect way, you totally should. You totally should do that. Ergo, absolutely. The continent would become a somewhat larger version of Puerto Rico. So he's saying feudal states without saying the term feudal states. He's saying Europe is being turned into a feudal state to the U.S. because of this proxy war. But the proxy war is just it's just the first domino or one of the earlier dominoes of an ongoing Cold War between Russia and U.S. But Russia is, he's saying, just a part of the true enemy, which is China. This full-blown version of the new Cold War triggered by the Ukraine war is likely to last at least a decade, perhaps two, as the U.S. extends the fight between neoliberalism and socialism. I don't know what is wrong with my lips today. I don't know what my lips are so shoved into my face on this particular morning. It's not morning, but felt like saying it. As the U.S. extends the fight between neoliberalism and socialism to encompass a worldwide conflict. Apart from the U.S. economic conquest of Europe, its strategists are seeking to lock in African, South American, and Asian countries along similar lines to what has been planned for Europe. Many African and Latin American countries, especially North Africa, face a choice between going hungry, cutting back their gasoline and electricity use, or borrowing the dollars to cover their dependency on U.S.-shaped trade. Some countries will turn to the IMF for help. Oh, that always goes well, right? When you turn to the IMF for help. Some countries will turn to the IMF for help. The IMF has its own policy of sanctioning countries that do not obey U.S. policy. The first U.S. demand will be that these countries boycott Russia, China, and their emerging trade and currency self-help alliance. And then he's saying U.S. officials will basically ask, why should we extend new loans to you if you are simply going to spend that money in Russia, China, and other countries that we have declared to be the enemies? So you create a situation economically that makes it incredibly hard for certain European countries, certain Latin American countries, etc., to get by. They then turn to the IMF or World Bank for help. The IMF then says, yeah, we'll give you that loan that'll help you get by, that'll help your citizens, it'll help everybody that's struggling. Then you have to pay back that loan, but you also have to, step one, stop doing trade with China and Russia, because we don't want you spending our money in enemy countries. The world economy is being inflamed, and the United States is demanding countries choose which side of the new Iron Curtain they wish to join. What is in this for the global South countries being squeezed? Not merely as collateral damage to the deep shortages and soaring prices for energy and food, but as the very objective of U.S. strategy as it inaugurates the great splitting of the world economy in two. I like that term. This is the great splitting. The U.S. is trying to cause a great split. They're not trying to cause cooperation. They're not trying to cause countries working together and helping each other. They're trying to cause a great split, a new Cold War, the likes of which we've barely seen. Pakistan, wait, hold on. World economy in two. India has already told U.S. diplomats that its economy is naturally connected with those of Russia and China. So we'll see how that goes for India. We'll see what the U.S. does to India to try and deal with the fact that India is right now aligning more with Russia and China. He then says, and by the way, this was written over a week ago. He then says, Pakistan finds the same calculus at work. What just happened to Pakistan? And I have to admit, I was not paying attention to this, but Imran Khan, Prime Minister of Pakistan, he said he was essentially siding with Russia or not coming out against Russia. He also announced certain economic deals with Russia. Guess what? All of a sudden, a vote of no confidence, Imran Khan is out in Pakistan. And actually, I'll pull up the article. Multipolarista, great site by Ben Norton. Let's see here. Here you go. Multipolarista predicted this. Basically predicted it, which is all you have to do is understand the U.S. and understand what it is when a country comes out against U.S. interests. Pakistan warned, this is before the vote of no confidence, warned of foreign-backed regime change attempt to disrupt China-Russia alliance. And the photo is of the now former Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan and Xi, China's Xi, shaking hands. And now just the other day, was it yesterday, the day before, Imran Khan was taken out with a vote of no confidence as head of Pakistan. And here is the other article. U.S.-backed coup in Pakistan overthrows Prime Minister Imran Khan over his independent foreign policy. And you can definitely check out those articles. If they're both on the front page of multipolarista.com. That's multipolarista.com. We also have it all at radindymedia.com. So if you want articles like this, go to radindymedia.com. All right, let's get back to the conclusion of this article by Michael Hudson, reposted at Popular Resistance. You can see it there. So really, this analysis predicted what just happened in Pakistan as well. where is it? Pakistan finds the same calculus as well. What is in it for it to stick with the U.S. strategy? So from the U.S. vantage point, all that needs to be answered is what's in it for the local politicians and client oligarchies that we reward for delivering their countries. Basically, we're asking the royal elite of these countries to deliver them to us in the great economic splitting. U.S. diplomatic strategists viewed the looming World War III as a war of economic systems. What side will countries choose? Their own economic interest and social cohesion, that's on one side, their own fucking economic interest and social cohesion, or submission to political leaders installed by U.S. meddling, like the $5 billion that Assistant Secretary of State Victoria Nuland bragged of having invested in Ukraine's neo-Nazi parties 8 years ago to initiate the fighting that has erupted into today's war. Basically, you have the country's own social interests and people versus U.S.-backed puppets, or if not U.S.-backed puppets, then countries that basically give in to the U.S. economic system because they don't feel they have a choice, which is what the EU is doing right now. How long will it take the rest of the world to realize that there's a global war underway with World War III on the horizon? The real problem is that by the time the world understands what's going on, the global fracture will already have enabled Russia, China, and Eurasia to create a real non-neoliberal New World Order that does not need NATO countries and which has lost trust and hope for mutual economic gains with them. The military battlefield will be littered with economic corpses. So I think what he's saying there is not that it's a problem for countries to go outside of the U.S. economic order. That in itself should be fine. It should be a part of independence of these countries to be able to do that. But I think what he's saying there at the end is how many countries are going to get destroyed in this process as the U.S. decides, as a fading empire in late-stage capitalism, that crushing countries, fighting this war to the last Ukrainian, letting innocent civilians die either from economic hardship or from straight-up bombs. The U.S. is fine with all of that. We are totally cool with it, and again, this is not to justify the Russian invasion, but this is to give you the full picture. If you want the bullshit picture, if you want the fake world, if you want all of that, then fine. Turn on CNN, turn on Fox News and MSNBC. Feel free. Just let that wash over you. Let the bullshit wash over you. But if you want to know the reality that's going on right now, it's far deeper than Ukraine. Ukraine is kind of an opening domino in a fight for U.S. petrodollar dominance, first domino in the dominance, in the fight over dominance. And so far from this analysis that I've just read to you being completely different from the video I made, a week, 2 weeks ago on how this war is actually about central banking, they actually work perfectly together, those two analyses. Because Russia is going and China are creating a SWIFT system outside of U.S. banking. That is why part of why the U.S. can't control them with our economic system. And so therefore we need to pick off territories, try and balkanize the countries, try and pick off territories from China, try and cause hardship for these countries rather than creating a cooperative world where we can deal with catastrophe that is facing us all, like climate change, climate fucking chaos, climate catastrophe, like all the ways we're destroying the environment, even beyond just climate change. For if there's any idiots out there who still have questions about climate chaos and climate catastrophe, then you should still care that we're killing the environment in other ways. The Amazon is going up in flames. The oceans are filling with plastic. The animals are dying. All these things should be cooperative efforts globally to deal with them. And instead, what the U.S. is trying to do is bend country to its will and create a new Cold War that will be the great economic split. And how many countries, Europe could very well suffer incredibly harshly from all of this over the next decade, 2 decades. So there you have it. I don't know if you wanted the truth or not. If you didn't want the truth, then this was the wrong episode to tune into, I think. But I really appreciate you guys joining me. And if you want to see more episodes like this, if you think this is a useful media to continue to gain, to continue to allow into your head holes, sounds dirty when you say it like that, then please become a member at patreon.com/Lee Camp. Most of you know I'm now one of the most censored comedians in America. TV show canceled, YouTube videos banned globally, podcast deleted from Spotify. So if you want to see this continue, then it's up to you. Patreon.com/Lee Camp. And yeah, I've got some cool announcements in the works. So just hang in there. And if you're not on the email list, one of the only ways I can keep interacting with folks is through email, because it does get other areas get very well suppressed. So please join the email. You can text the word redacted to 33777, or you can go to leecamp.com and a pop-up comes up to join the email list. Email list is all free. And lastly, leave a comment. Let me know how much of this analysis you agree with, if there's anything you disagree with, if there's any deeper motives you think even beyond the ones I just went through, then let me know and keep fighting.